The woman who had spent 2 years trying to end my career was standing in the corner of a stalled elevator with her back to me, crying so quietly I almost mistook it for the sound of the cables. She didn't turn around. She just said, in a voice scraped down to almost nothing, "Promise you won't tell anyone. Not please. Not don't you dare enjoy this. Just promise." I promised. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and most of them I can at least explain. That one I still can't. Because the second the word left my mouth, something in my chest quietly rearranged itself, and the next 8 months of my life walked straight through the gap it left behind. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 35. I'm a project manager at a mid-sized firm that designs and builds the insides of buildings, offices, lobbies, the kind of spaces people move through 1,000 times without ever once looking up. My job, specifically, is to be the man who tells the designers what their dreams actually cost. It does not make you popular. I had a decent apartment, a coffee machine I'd bought instead of going to a friend's wedding, and a habit of staying at the office late enough that the cleaning crew and I were on a first-name basis. I wasn't lonely. I was just extremely good at being alone, and I had decided a long time ago that those were the same thing. Then, there was Sloan. Her name was Nora Sloan, but nobody called her Nora. She was the lead designer on the floor above mine, 4 years younger than me, and roughly 400 times more certain of everything in the universe. She marked up every drawing that crossed her desk in green ink. Green, because red was what everyone else used, and she had decided somewhere early in life that she was not going to be everyone else, ever, about anything. She held a pen the way other people hold a verdict. She walked fast even when she had nowhere to be. She drank her coffee black and looked faintly disappointed in anyone who didn't, and in 2 full years she had never once laughed at a single thing I said, which I had quietly filed under both personal challenge and character flaw. We met the day I killed her first big proposal, flagged the budget, kicked it back, and let her find out in a room full of people. She looked at me across that conference table like she was memorizing my face for some later, colder purpose. After that, it was war. Polite, professional, scorched earth war. She thought I was a small man with a calculator where his imagination should be. I thought she was an artist who had never once in her life had to pay for anything she'd drawn. We were each a little bit right, which is the most uncomfortable possible way for 2 people to be wrong about each other. I told myself I disliked her. That was the lie I had organized my entire face around. The night the elevator happened, we had both just lost the exact same thing. It was a Thursday in February, late, the kind of cold that gets down into a building's bones and refuses to leave. The office had that particular after-hours smell, burnt coffee at the bottom of the pot, warm toner, the ghost of somebody's microwave dinner. Our biggest client of the year had spent 18 months letting us design a headquarters for them, and that afternoon they had called to say they were going in a different direction, which is the corporate way of saying they'd found someone cheaper who would say yes faster. 18 months. Her drawings. My budgets. The whole thing, gone in a 4-minute phone call. We had fought each other over every single inch of that project, and now it was nothing, and somehow that made the 2 of us the only people on Earth who understood exactly what had just died. I didn't see her get into the elevator. I'd worked late enough to outlast my own bad mood, and I stepped in on the 11th floor already reaching for my phone. My mind somewhere 2 blocks away on a beer I hadn't bought yet. The doors slid shut. The car dropped 2 floors, and then the whole thing shuddered, groaned somewhere deep in its chest, and stopped dead between landings. The way our building's ancient elevator did maybe twice a year, always at the precise moment you had the least patience left to give it. That was when I heard it. A small, wet, furious breath. The sound of a person trying very hard to cry in a way that makes no sound at all, and failing by the narrowest possible margin. She had her back to me, one hand flat against the brushed steel wall like she was personally holding the building up. Her shoulders weren't shaking dramatically. They were barely moving at all. That was somehow worse than if they had been. I should admit that in 2 years I had imagined a great many versions of Sloane finally losing. I'm not proud of the catalog, but not one of those imagined versions had ever looked like this. Smaller, stripped of the armor. A person standing where an opponent used to be. "Sloane," I said. Quietly, the way you'd say it to something you didn't want to startle into the road. She went still, not dramatically, just still. Then, without turning around, in that scraped-down voice, "Promise you won't tell anyone." And I understood the whole shape of it in that one sentence. She didn't actually care that I had seen her cry. She cared that somebody might find out she wasn't built out of the things she'd spent her entire career convincing people she was built out of. The crying was not the secret. The not being fine was the secret. "I promise," I said. Then I did the single most useful thing I have ever done inside an elevator. I didn't ask what was wrong. I didn't tell her it would be okay. I leaned back against the opposite wall, far enough to hand her the whole rest of the car, and I said, "For whatever it's worth, they were idiots. Your atrium was the best thing this firm has put on paper in 10 years. It was true. It cost me something to say out loud, which is exactly how I knew it was true." She let out a sound that was half a sob and half, against all available evidence, a laugh. "You hated that atrium. I hated that it was 400 grand over budget," I said. "I never once said it wasn't beautiful." She turned around then. Her eyes were wrecked, her careful face completely undone, and she looked at me like she was seeing a stranger wearing the skin of a man she had been certain she'd had entirely figured out. The elevator chose that exact moment to remember it had a job, and lurched back into motion. We rode the final 2 floors in a silence that had weight to it. When the doors opened, she walked out fast, the way she always did, and she did not look back. But she'd left something behind in that car. Not an object, a fact. The fact that I had just stood in a small steel box and watched my enemy come apart at the seams and felt no satisfaction whatsoever, only a strange, total, alarming need to make it stop. That bothered me far more than it had any business bothering me. For the rest of that week I told myself it didn't mean anything. People are human at the edges. I had simply caught her at one of hers. By Monday she'd be back to herself, and so would I. And we could return to the clean and simple business of ruining each other's afternoons. I was extremely committed to this explanation. I repeated it to myself the way you repeat a phone number you're afraid of forgetting, which, in hindsight, should have told me everything. Because you do not rehearse a thing you actually believe. You only rehearse the things you're scared are slipping. The problem was that I had seen behind the green ink now. And you cannot unsee a thing like that, no matter how late you stay at the office trying. She did come back to herself on Monday. Mostly, she kicked 2 of my cost estimates straight back at me with notes sharp enough to shave with. But the war had changed temperature somewhere down underneath, where neither of us was looking, and we both felt the shift, and neither of us would have admitted it under oath or threat. It started, like most disasters in my life, with paperwork. We were assigned, by a manager with either no memory or a genuinely cruel sense of humor, to jointly salvage whatever we could of the dead project for a smaller, poorer client who'd take the bones of it. A consolation prize. which meant that after 2 years of working against each other, we were suddenly working together, elbow to elbow, at the same long table. The first morning, I came in to find a markup waiting on my desk in that unmistakable green. And at the bottom of the page, where she usually wrote something along the lines of "See budget, try harder," she had written 3 different words instead. "This part's good. Don't change it." 3 words of praise. From Sloan. In green ink. I kept that page. I am not going to stand here and pretend I didn't. The second thing was her sister. The firm threw one of its mandatory Fun Friday gatherings, the kind with warm wine and colder conversation, and Sloane's younger sister turned up at the end to collect her. Somewhere in the small talk by the coat rack, the sister glanced at me, then back at Sloane, then back at me, and said, "Oh, you're Foster," like my name was a town she had already visited and formed opinions about. Sloane abruptly discovered something deeply fascinating to study on the ceiling tiles. I may have a calculator where my imagination is supposed to live, but even I can do that particular piece of arithmetic. The third thing was a Tuesday. I came around the corner into the empty office kitchen and caught her on the phone, not knowing I was there, defending one of my budget calls to a vendor who was trying to go over my head. "No," she was saying, low and flat. "If Foster signed off, then it's right. He's a pain, but he is never wrong about money. A pain, but never wrong." This from the woman who had once informed an entire conference room that I possessed the soul of a spreadsheet. I backed out before she could see me and stood in the hallway holding my coffee like it was the only stable object left in the building. I had promised myself I'd stop noticing her. My domestic surveillance habits were, frankly, becoming a little threatening. But you tell a man not to think about something, and you have just rented it a permanent, rent-controlled apartment in the center of his head. So I noticed. I noticed she clicked that green pen when she was nervous. 3 clicks, always exactly 3. Then she'd catch herself and stop, like a person realizing they were humming in church. I noticed she had started taking the long way around the floor, the route that happened to pass my desk. I noticed that when she disagreed with me now, which was still constantly, she did it standing a great deal closer than the disagreement strictly required. And one evening, deep into the salvage job, just the 2 of us and a foam model of a building that nobody on earth was ever going to build, I noticed her watching me across the table when she thought I was looking at the drawings. I looked up. She didn't look away fast enough. For 1 full second she held my gaze, 1 entire second longer than felt safe for either of us. And then she dropped her eyes to her own hands, pressed her lips together hard, and said absolutely nothing at all. Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. The radiator ticked in the corner like a clock that had lost confidence in the hour. Somewhere far below us, the cleaning crew was working its slow way up through the floors. I could hear her breathing, and then I became aware of my own, and the entire room narrowed itself down to the 1.5 foot of laminate between her green pen and my right hand. I have built an entire career out of knowing precisely what things cost. I could not, in that moment, have told you the cost of reaching across that table. It was the only number I'd ever been handed that I genuinely could not run. She broke the silence first. She always would, in the end. I think we both already knew that about us, before we knew anything else. "Can I tell you something?" she said, still not looking up. "If I make you promise again." My chest did something complicated and unbudgeted. I set my own pen down. "You don't have to," I said. "We can keep doing this instead." The arguing. I'm honestly very good at it. It's basically the one thing on my URSUM. A small pause. We can pretend the elevator just had a bad day and go back to normal. Nobody would ever have to know it happened. It was the exit. And I held the door open for her on purpose, all the way. And I meant it. Because I had a rule about her now. One I had never said aloud to anyone, least of all myself. I was never going to be the one who pushed. Whatever this was turning into, she had to be the one to walk through it under her own steam, or it didn't count. And I would honestly have rather lost her cleanly than won her by a single inch she hadn't fully meant to give me. She did not take the door. She set the green pen down instead and lined it up very carefully with the edge of the table, the precise way people arrange small objects when the large thing they're holding is too heavy to set down all at once. And she said, that night. In the elevator, you never told anyone. It wasn't a question. I spent weeks waiting for it to come back around on me. Waiting for the day you'd use it in a meeting, in front of people, the way I told myself you would, the way I would have if it had been you crying instead of me. Her voice dropped, lost its edge entirely. And you just didn't. You never did. And it turns out I had no idea what to do with a man who could have hurt me and simply decided not to. I don't think I'd ever actually met one. She finally lifted her eyes to mine. It's been ruining my concentration, she said, for about 8 months now. That landed. That sentence did something quiet and permanent to the whole room. I went still, the exact way she'd somehow taught me to go still, in a stalled elevator without either of us ever noticing the lesson being given. My throat had a stone in it that hadn't been there a minute before. And when I could finally speak, I didn't reach for anything clever. Clever is just hiding with better branding, and I was so completely done hiding. Sloan, I started. And then, because it was the truest thing left in me, and it had been waiting an extraordinarily long time to get out, I used the other name, Nora. I have spent 2 years arguing with you, because it was the only honest way I could think of to keep you in the room with me. Every project I ever sat across from you on, I fought you over every line, every dollar, and I told myself the whole time that it was about the work. I made myself hold her eyes and not blink. It was never once about the work. When something good happens to me, you're the first person I want to tell, even though you're supposed to be the last person on the planet I'm allowed to. When something goes wrong, it's still you. I don't have a budget line for this. Believe me, I've gone looking for one. She made a sound, that same half laugh, half something with no name, and her fingers tightened once, hard around the edge of the table, and her eyes went bright and unguarded in a way I had only ever seen one single time before, in the corner of an elevator, with her back turned to me so I couldn't see her face. Say my name again, she said, barely above a whisper. The real one. Nora. And she closed the 1.5 foot of table herself. She reached across it and took my hand off the drawing. Just took it. Simply and completely, the way you collect something that has been yours the entire time and you're finally done leaving it lying around. And she held on. That was all. No grand cinematic kiss. Not yet. Just her hand wrapped around mine, on top of a building that no one would ever build. 2 rivals who had finally and permanently run clean out of reasons to fight. And then her phone lit up on the table between us, buzzing furiously against the wood, the screen flashing her sister's name above a text that read, in its entirety, "Did you tell him yet?" Nora, did you? Sloan shut her eyes. I am going to kill her. Slowly, I have the design skills to make it look like an accident. She knew? I said. Everyone knew, she said, into her free hand. Daniel, everyone has known for months. There was a theory at the holiday party. Marcus made a chart. There were columns. And I laughed. The first fully real laugh that building had gotten out of me in 2 entire years, and after a second she laughed too, finally, helplessly, at something I'd done. Except I hadn't actually done anything except sit there holding her hand and being, as it turned out, the very last person in the whole office to find out I was in love. 3 months later, she was still kicking my cost estimates back at me. She just did it now from the other end of my couch, in my sweatshirt, with the green pen, narrating each of her cruelties out loud so that I'd have a fair chance to defend myself. We did not tell people at work for a while, which mostly meant we performed a careful, professional version of arguing in meetings that was, in retrospect, deeply and embarrassingly unconvincing to every single person in the room except the two of us. A year after that, she left a note for me on the bathroom mirror in green dry erase marker, because she couldn't find a normal pen anywhere in a home full of pens. And it said only, "Out of coffee, you monster." And I stood there in the doorway grinning like a fool at a piece of glass, because it turns out the things that used to feel like attacks feel like something else entirely when they're aimed at you on purpose, every morning, by a person who has looked at all the available options and quietly decided to keep you. Years later, when people ask how the two of us ever got together, and they always ask, because we used to hate each other is a better opening than most people ever get, she tells the elevator version, and I tell the green ink version, and we argue, in front of company, about which one is the true beginning. Because of course we do. She says it started the night I watched her fall apart, and didn't pick up a single piece of her to throw it back. I say it started 2 whole years before that. The afternoon she looked at me across a conference table like she was memorizing my face, and I was too much of a coward to lean over and ask her why. Nothing about us ever really changed, in the end. She is still the sharpest person in any room she walks into. I still know the exact cost of everything on earth. The only difference is that now, when she goes quiet and still in the corner of some small space, I don't have to pretend it isn't the single most important thing happening anywhere in the world. It was never new, the thing between us. It had almost certainly always been there. It had just, after a very long time, finally stopped hiding. So, what would you have done if you'd stepped into that elevator and found the one person you were never ever supposed to be soft with falling apart right in front of you? Would you have kept the promise? And have you ever spent years calling something by completely the wrong name, only to find out far too late that it had been love the entire time? Tell me your story down in the comments. If this one found you tonight, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.